On tax day today, 14 trillion umpteen and 7 million thousand people approximately descended on our nation's capital to make their angry voices heard.
We want our country back, and we want it back now!
And random angry man yelling at rally, how do you propose doing that?
We have got to take the country back by taking back the way they take our money from us.
See, we will form our own people's tax collecting bureaucracy or something. The annual April 15th I Hate Paying Taxes tantrum this year took the form of an online tax revolt that was sponsored by all sorts of conservative organizations like our friends at the AstroTurf group Freedom Works and the National Taxpayers Union and the Republican Tea Party group, the Tea Party Express. In addition to those folks on the street, they were meeting online, and right from the opening prayer at today's online revolt, the message was very clear.
Thus, we have the tragic situation we're considering today: unjust, unconstitutional taxation in our land.
The general complaint at all of the various tax day protests today was that President Obama and those commie Democrats in Congress have raised taxes so much. Since they took over, our taxes have just gone through the roof. We've had all we can stands, and we can't stands no more.
I would like to say a special thank you to the three who did the most to make this possible for all of us to get together. And of course, I'm thinking of Harry Reid and Nancy Pelosi and Barack Obama.
This income tax system is badly broken, badly corrupted, benefits Washington at our expense.
Okay, so there are two things that happen right around tax day every year. One, people get mad and protest about their taxes getting jacked up to liberty-infringing levels. And two, people who track this stuff tell us in quantitative, factual terms what's actually going on with our level of taxation right now. And this year, the distance between those two things has never been greater. The rain on the tax revolt parade started early with this morning headline from the Associated Press. Quote, Americans paying less taxes this year despite tax day rhetoric. Less taxes? What about the revolt? As the AP notes, quote, Congress cut individuals' federal taxes for this year by about $173 billion shortly after President Barack Obama took office. It is an inconvenient fact for all of the tax day protesters today, but taxes have actually gone down quite a bit under Barack Obama. The nonpartisan Center for Budget and Policy Priorities yesterday said thanks to Obama tax cuts, a family of four in the exact middle of the income spectrum is paying federal income taxes this year at the second lowest rate of any year, all the way back to 1955, which is as far back as the statistics go. In terms of not just income taxes, but all federal taxes, including paying for Social Security and everything, middle-income families are at or near their lowest level in decades. But if you want to still feel angry about it anyway and be mad at Obama over taxes, it's okay. Just emote. Just let it all out. Don't let the facts hold you back. Congressman Kingston, you want to take it from here?
I just talked to a friend of mine. A friend of mine is a liberal. And he says, don't these people realize that 95% of you got a tax cut under the stimulus plan with President Obama? And I'm saying, if you believe that, then you believe the health care bill is going to give you better health care.
Now, I love stuff like this because whether or not 95% of people, as he said, got a tax cut from the stimulus, it isn't a subjective thing. It isn't a matter of opinion. It's not something you can choose to believe or not choose to believe. This is one of those knowable facts. Assuming most of the folks in the crowd there work for a living, 95% of them really did get a tax cut under the stimulus plan. It's a fact. Here's the AP again. Quote, the massive economic recovery package enacted last year included about $300 billion in tax cuts over 10 years. About $232 billion was in cuts for individuals. I understand it might feel good to say that Obama's raising your taxes, and isn't he just some awful commie tax and spend liberal? I know that might feel good to say. I know Congressman Kingston, for example, that it might be fun to tell your liberal friend that he's stupid for believing that stimulus included tax cuts. But for those who are interested in them, there are knowable facts here. The average tax refund is up nearly 10% this year. More than 95% of people did get a tax cut in the stimulus. Taxes went down for almost every single American this past year, largely as a result of 25 separate tax cuts passed by President Obama over the last year. Here they are. All 25 of them. Tax credits if you work, tax credits if you don't work, tax credits if you buy a house, tax credits if you make that house energy efficient, tax credits if you buy a car, tax credits if you buy an electric car. The list goes on and on and on and on and on and on. I am sure that it feels great to rail against President Obama and Democrats for raising your taxes through the roof this year. You know, it also feels really good to close your eyes and imagine that you can fly. Just think of it, you can fly. You can't really fly. Joining us now is Ezra Klein, staff writer for The Washington Post and Newsweek contributor, who I have to say I cannot verify that he cannot fly. He can do most other things. Hi, Ezra. Nice to see you.
Good evening. Guess how I got here.
Yeah, I understand. Far be it from me, you and Jack Kingston. One of the things that is gained a lot of traction among the I hate paying taxes crowds that gathered today around the country is this idea that half of the country doesn't pay any taxes at all. 47% of people are freeloaders. They don't pay any taxes. Can you explain where that number came from and what it really means?
Right. So there are two separate dodges in that number. One is that it's a number about federal income tax. So that is one of about 4 or 5 taxes most of us pay. And it's interesting because it shows sort of the class bias of this conversation. For people who make a fair amount of money, congressmen, for instance, we primarily pay federal income tax. That is the big hit for us. But 3/4 of Americans pay more payroll tax than they pay income tax. And then there's state and local taxes beyond that. So if you add everything together, actually, the tax code looks a lot less progressive. Pretty much most people pay about the same amount as a share of their income. But if you just look at federal income tax, if you just look at the income tax that mostly hits rich people, it looks like poor people are paying less. The second piece of it then is that we run a lot of our social policy through the tax code. So for poor folks, the earned income tax credit, or for richer folks, the first-time home buyers tax credit, which is part of the stimulus, as I remember, both of those wipe out your tax liability. Instead of the government simply sending you a check, what happens is that it's calculated on your taxes. If you owed $5,000 and the new home buyer's tax credit is $8,000, then the government wipes out your $5,000 and gives you $3,000, hence zero effective federal income tax rate, but not zero effective federal income taxes. If you have a problem, your problem is with the new home buyer's tax credit, not the tax code.
And so the political impact that they're going for there is if you feel like you're paying taxes, you are in the minority and everybody else is freeloading off of you. That's obviously the sort of political impact there. But isn't there also sort of a little political paradox here with these anti-tax crowds railing about Americans paying too little in tax?
There's a bit of that. And one place you saw it is, I think it was a CBS New York Times poll today. And they found that 62% of Americans think what they pay in taxes, what they paid this year, was pretty much fair. 52% of Tea Partiers think the same. But what you do get into is that Americans think the taxes that other people pay aren't fair, that the rich are paying too little, that the poor are paying too little, that they're the sort of beleaguered one. And to some degree, you can argue back and forth on that. You can argue that, you know, we give too much in social spending to the poor. You can certainly argue that we have, over the past couple of years, with the Bush tax cuts and everything else, stop taxing the rich or corporations to the degree that we should. But the funny thing is that most people, even Tea Partiers, think that their taxes are pretty much acceptable.
Where are, just for context here, Ezra, briefly, where are tax rates now as compared to, say, the Reagan era? That was another thing that struck me today, is how often Reagan was invoked as sort of a low taxes god to the crowds here.
Reagan was a menace when it came from taxes. He brought taxes quite a bit down in his first year, raised them for a number of years after that, but his taxes were a lot higher than they are now, which is part of why we see the deficits that we do now. It's a big part of the reason why. We have become a sort of a lower taxing nation, even as we're a higher spending nation. And that's part of the problem. When people say they want a lower tax burden, and then the next week the Tea Party protests the high deficit, and then the next week you hear the Republicans on the floor of the Congress saying, we will not ever let Democrats touch Medicare or Social Security or anything else, you sort of scratch your head and you say, well, what pony is going to come in with all the money that we need to make all this work together? And as of yet, there's been no pony.
Yeah, the simultaneous existence of all those arguments is the one silver lining around not funding math education. Very well. Ezra Klein, staff writer for The Washington Post, thank you for your time tonight, Ezra.
Thank you.